I'm Nadia Gurwell.
I'm John Guglieltino.
I'm Michelle Blanchard. Welcome to 30 Minutes.
Welcome to 30 Minutes. My name is John Guglieltino. I'm your host. And with me, we're going to be talking about with the World Traveler, the guy in Danbury that's well known as the World Traveler, Jeff Harold. He's been here before, and we're going to continue a European trip that he took and a riverboat trip, and maybe we might get into some other things. So welcome to the show.
Pleased to be here, Joe. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're looking dapper as you usually are.
I'm feeling great. Things are good.
Yeah, very good. I see you have a new, aside from your usual flag that you have, you also have another decal. Can you explain that?
I do. That pin is the pin representing the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and that's a charity that is designed and developed to provide for the families of those firefighters killed in the line of action. And it's one of those charities I hold dear to my heart, have been in the fire service for 40 some odd years. But it's a wonderful charity, and they do great work to help the survivors of firefighters lost in duty.
Now, you mentioned you were in the firefighting business, so to speak, for 47 years. And
40 plus years.
40
right.
plus
40
years.
Plus years, right.
And maybe a little bit of background for people that don't know you from
okay.
the previous shows.
All right.
Yeah.
My family moved to Danbury in '63, and I was raised here for the rest of that time. I went to school here. I joined the fire department as a volunteer at Germantown Hose in 1974, and then I was appointed to the career department in '79. I worked there until July of '14. Then I did a stint up in Marlborough, Massachusetts as the fire chief up there. I retired from Danbury as the chief and then went to Marlborough, Mass. And since that time, I've been doing some consulting work, working with the statewide incident management team and doing some of that work. So I'm still involved with the emergency services, and I'm still in Danbury. So.
And when you're not doing that, you're the World Traveler.
Well, I don't know about that so far. I haven't covered the whole world, and I'm still plucking away. I got some other ideas and some things to do.
You have a lot more than more traveling than most people do.
Well, at this point, I've been very fortunate too.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate to be able to do some of these things, and I've had some wonderful trips over the last 3 years since I've retired. Absolutely.
Very good. Now we were in England, then we went to Normandy, and now we're going to cover the battlefields after Normandy.
Right. So after the Normandy trip, what we did, the tour group moved up the coast a little ways. We did visit Bayeux and saw the Bayeux Tapestry, and then went on up the coast, and then headed into to Paris. And at this time, we're covering both mostly World War II battlefields till we get to Paris. And then after we arrived in Paris, we were there for 3 days. And we had a couple of days just to see Paris. Of course, when you're in Paris, you can't not see Paris.
You got to see the Eiffel Tower.
The Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, and
yeah.
the biggest thing I liked about Paris was hiking up the hill to the Sacré-Cœur Church and looking over Paris from there. It was wonderful. But then we went north of Paris, and just north of Paris, and 100 years ago at this time, were the major battlefields of World War I. Those are the battlefields that resonate in history, the Marne and Somme, Chateau-Thierry. These are other battlefields that were unfortunately renowned for their carnage. There's stories of 60,000 casualties killed and wounded within like 1 day's battle.
Yeah, because the warfare was trench warfare.
Well, it was trench warfare, and they were fighting the past war against machine guns and modern ammunition and a whole different environment. And unfortunately, there are still stretches of these battlefields that are literally off limits, not due to mines like so many people think, but due just to live ammunition such as artillery shells. There was one place where there was a fenced off area, and it was warning people not to go there. And you're taking pictures, you're following a trench line, and I admit I wound up on the wrong side of the fence, and I'm literally just filming the old trench line, and I come around the corner or around the tree, and there's a 6-inch artillery shell sticking out of the ground, about this long, this big around.
And it's still possibly live.
No, it is still live. And every year they say about 20 people a year get killed by handling and mishandling these. And the other part of this is not just explosive ammunition that's in these battlefields. A lot of it is still the gas ammunition. So there's live gas agents,
mustard gas
and such in these live shells. So there are other injuries that happen every year. And the farmers, of course, are farming the fields. And as they plow, they dig some of these up. And there were areas we passed where there's a pile of ammunition, a pile of live shells on the side of the road. They collect them, and then the military comes by every so often and picks them all up and then disposes of them. But the thing that was important to me was to actually visit the battlefields themselves because of the recognition. Now, this trip was in 2014, which was the anniversary of the start of World War I. And we were actually there at the time of the start, the actual
Let's
declaration
see
of
if I can
war.
remember. Was it August 1st of 1914?
I think that was the first military clash, but if I
Yeah.
remember correctly, the actual declaration of war, I think, was on the 28th of July, when the
Okay.
first belligerent,
Yeah.
said, okay, we're at war. But the point was we wanted to be there, and in that process, we visited some of the, now very famous, although sadly famous places. Vimy Ridge, for example, where the Canadians fought a tremendous battle, and it was really the first time that they were under their own leadership instead of being under the British generals, and they accounted themselves well, but it was a horrible, horrible, decimating battle. And they still honor and recognize that because the Canadians suffered terribly in that battle. And then, of course, we also visited the scene where the U.S. Marines were actually on the ground in Europe, and they fought, on the Allies' cause after the U.S. entered the war in April of 1917.
Right.
And we went to those. I went to that battlefield, and actually, I have a friend of mine who's a former Marine. I guess they're never former, but he's
No,
he's
you're
no
always a
longer
Marine.
active. Always a Marine. And thinking of him, I actually picked up a stone from the battlefield, and he was very honored by that because the Marines are really they have a wonderful recognition of their own history.
Right.
And he was taken by that. So it was a nice, it worked out well. And but Chateau Thierry was the place where this was, and the cemeteries and the memorials are just inspiring. They have wonderful architecture, and this particular one.
And it brings a lot of trade.
oh.
The
Yes.
tours.
The tours and such are there. And what's
yeah.
really interesting is the Graves Commission and the Memorial Commission that owns these grave sites are owned by the countries, not France or Belgium. They're owned by the U.S. or by Britain, or
In other words, the countries that fought there that had the predominant number
exactly.
of troops there.
And there was a caretaker there at this cemetery where the Marines fought. And the cemetery itself, with the memorial in the center, is kind of wrapped around the bottom of a hill, so it's a big arc with the gravestones. Very moving, very amazingly emotional. And then you can walk up to see the area where the actual fighting took place, and there's still shell holes, there's still trenches, there's still areas where the men fought and died. And they maintain these memorials in a very reverent, very wonderful fashion. And the memorials there, if you go online, you can look up some of these World War I memorials. The architecture is soaring, it's inspiring. But the thing that moved me the most was we were in a village, and it's an area in Ypres, and it's called the Menin Gate. And at the Menin Gate, there's an archway gate, and inscribed on the inside are the names of mostly British and New Zealand and Australian soldiers, that fought for the empire there, that have no known graves. And the walls are just covered because they don't.
They know they were in the war,
They
but
were
they
in the
don't
war.
know. They don't know
there,
where the bodies were.
And they
Yeah.
were, so mangled and so, horrifyingly destroyed by the enemy or by what happened. The Germans were too. And the German, memorials are as equally as, as austere and as moving as you might find. After we left the Somme and the Marne, the trip moved on up into Belgium, and we did some more of the World War I battlefields, but then we went on to also the Bridge Too Far battle in World War II.
Right.
And there's an area there where the bridge...
Bastogne and that
Well,
area.
we went actually past Bastogne, which is just on the Belgium-Luxembourg border, and we went on into the World War I or World War II battlefield of Arnhem, where the Bridge Too Far, which is a
where
very famous movie.
That's right. There was
Yeah.
a troop or whatever that was, a battalion went too far.
They were too far, and they got cut off, and they weren't
yeah.
able to get to them to support them, and they were
Yeah.
eventually captured by the Germans. And that was, I believe, in the fall of 44.
Right.
And then, of course, the Battle of the Bulge happened in the meantime, so they served the last 6 or 8
that happened
months.
during the winter.
Yeah, and but that battlefield too was very moving. It's in World War II. It's of course now 20 years on, and so much of what happened in World War I, of course, eventually contributed to and led to World War II.
Correct.
But the battlefield there was very moving, and there's a wonderful collection of artifacts from the soldiers that parachuted into the area. And then so we did that area and did the museums and the battlefields there.
And what kind of buildings are there like museums?
Oh yeah, they've got a museum there, and
so you're not just standing in the elements.
No.
Yeah.
You go around the corner and there'll be a cemetery. You go around another. There's a tank there. There's an artillery piece. But the particular museum for the Arnhem area talks about the paratroopers and is dedicated to the paratroopers who went deeply into the enemy territory with the intention of holding the land and holding the territory until the ground forces to get them. And so many of them, of course, didn't survive, and the ground forces didn't get there. Then once we left that area, we went on into Amsterdam itself, and that we ended our trip there for 2 days, where we, of course, saw Anne Frank's house and visited the area of Amsterdam, and we saw some of the memorials to the Jewish citizens that were, of course, badly mistreated and horribly executed in all those death camps that were there, in the areas surrounding the area, where the Nazis had control. And we finished our trip from there. And so then we flew home from Amsterdam, and it was a 15-day trip, and it was just an amazingly engrossing and in-depth historical perspective, and covering both wars, now 100 years on from World War I, of course, was a very interesting thing for me, and it tied that history into the World War II history with this particular tour. What's very interesting, of course, now we're 100 years out now from when the U.S. was actively fighting the war,
right.
And next year is the anniversary of the end of World War I, and I do have plans. I'm going there. We're gonna go back, my friend Glenn and I. We hope to go back to London, visit the Imperial War Museum, and then probably go back to the mainland Europe and probably see a couple of battlefields we didn't get to see from World War I.
And I think that everybody that fought in World War I think are pretty much gone.
Oh yeah, they're all gone. Yeah, actually, there's a wonderful book called The Last of the Doughboys, which was a book written interviewing, I believe, the last 100 U.S. men and women who were in uniform in World War II. They were sailors, soldiers, not just the doughboy and the infantry. But that book was written a number of years ago and came out the year before I traveled, because I read it that year. And in that ensuing time, the last of them had died. So they are all gone. As far as anybody, as far as I'm aware, there are none left that actually fought in combat at that time. There are still some people who were alive, but they weren't combat soldiers and sailors.
Right.
So.
Very good. So that was pretty much concluded the
that
battlefields,
yep,
and then you went on a trip down the what rivers?
Oh yeah, the riverboat cruise. We flew out in April. I flew with my
from where? New York to
flew New York to Amsterdam,
okay.
And my girlfriend Beth Ann and I, we were on a cruise. We had 5 other friends of ours, the same gentleman who went with me on the World War I cruise. So there were 7 of us,
right.
And Beth Ann and I paired up with the 5 of them, and we were on this riverboat cruise on the Avalon Cruise Lines, and we sailed from Amsterdam, ended up in Budapest after 14 days or 16 days.
16-day trip.
16 days.
And that was the concluding part. Was
in Budapest. We wound up there, and we started off in Amsterdam, and it was at the beginning of
which a lot of people don't know this thing about Budapest. There's the city of Buda and the city of Pest.
Across the river, right.
And they call it Budapest because of close proximity in the
right.
the government, but that's what they were. Originally,
absolutely.
There were
two separate cities, yeah. Absolutely. So we started in Amsterdam, and we got there for the Keukenhof Tulip Festival, which is, of course, what they're famous for in Amsterdam, and where they grow the tulips for distribution worldwide. And we went there and visited the displays there and the arboretum, where all these wonderful flowers. They have a wonderful orchid collection, by the way, in this same hothouse. It's absolutely astounding. And then after a couple of days, the cruise, we boarded the boat. We were on the boat the second day there. And then the boat was a smaller ship. Was
that like 100 people?
138 passengers on it.
Right.
We're capable. I think there were 133 on this particular cruise. Avalon is they're mostly newer boats, wonderful crews, and what I really enjoyed about it, it was basically a local ship, because it would stop at each of the villages and they would buy provisions from the local suppliers. So as we moved through the country, as we came through Amsterdam, Belgium, and then Germany, and we would stop at each of the local areas, they would buy the local food. So we were having, for example, pork raised by the farmers in Würzburg. Of course, the German beer was coming on fresh too, you know, so we always had to have the beer. And the wines were commonly there. And the
They're
ship,
mainly German wines, weren't they?
well, all when we were in Germany, but when we were in Austria, they were Austrian wines.
Yeah,
and when we
that's
were in
true.
France, they were French wines.
Okay.
You know, so yeah, and we had Belgian beer, and there were beers, you know, available all the time to go with the different food. But what the chef was very, very amazing, and what they would do is they would, you know, suggest pairings with what they're having: local food, local wines, local beers, and as we went through the cruise, we started off, came from the Amsterdam canals and to the Rhine River, and then we went to, I've got to get the order right, we went to the main Rhine Canal, which connects the Main River and the Rhine River. And all the time we're going through different locks. Now, as you go into Central Europe, you know, as we're coming into Germany, we're actually rising.
Right.
So we'd have to go in the locks and rise up. And then we'd get into the Main River Canal, we went to the Main River. Then we're on the other side, so now we're going down. And I believe the highest lock was 80 meters high, which was 200 some odd feet high. And
So
they would
the,
have to
the
raise it up.
entire river has got a system of dams and
Dams and locks to raise the
Yeah,
boats
to
and
raise
go.
them,
And,
yeah.
and it was very interesting because to see things in Germany from the river, I'd been to Germany before, but to see them from the river, because the rivers are the ancient ways of travel.
Right.
And that's the way everybody from the Romans to the Gauls to the Celts, everybody transported goods on the rivers.
on the rivers.
So to see it and from that perspective, to understand the historical significance of the river system and to see how it aided in the growth of Western civilization in Europe,
Yeah.
it really was amazing. Some of the other things I noticed that was fascinating to me is in Germany, for example, and right now, after we went to Cologne and came through, I honestly can't remember which city it was in, but at one point, we'd climbed up a hill, you know, the boat would dock, and we'd have the day in the local villages or whatever. And you went up the hill to a castle area, and you're looking out from this beautiful castle, which is still occupied and used as a government post.
I was
of
going to
some
say, it's
sort.
got to be a government
Well,
facility.
yeah, but this is like it's not a true castle. It was an outbuilding, and they probably had a school there at one point, if I remember correctly. But as you're looking out for 180 degrees, from as far as you can see to the left to the right, there's electric power generating windmills. They've taken this generation of power through soft means, and they're burning less and less coal and less oils, and they're using this. It's just tremendous. You can see, you know, these turbines as far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
And you know, so that was very interesting to see how much they've embraced that and how absolutely important it is, you know, that they actually, you know, capture the wind power. One of the things that absolutely fascinated me, and right now I am forgetting the name of the village, but we were docked, and it was a small village, not very large at all, but it was famous because this particular village and the castle that was now. This is in Germany.
Germany.
Yeah, just getting over towards Austria. And actually, I can't remember whether this was actually in Austria at the time because the lines have changed back and forth. So I honestly don't remember. But the castle that was there, now in ruins, is the castle where Richard III, the Lionheart, was held captive after he was kidnapped coming home from the crusade. And that historical aspect just absolutely fascinated me. And the part that I guess really...
I didn't think they held him.
They held him for 6 months in this castle, I
No,
believe.
but I thought he was
So-
caught down
so-
further down.
No,
towards
he was
the,
caught. He was
yeah.
caught on the river in Austria, Germany. I can't, like I said, I'm not remembering the
and
village.
held for ransom.
Held for ransom, and they paid his ransom. That was roughly, I believe they said 9/10 of the value of England, Great Britain at the time, to get him back. And of course, that's all tied into you know, our histories of Robin Hood and whatever the mythology that tied around
Right.
that, of course. But to be there in that place, in that spot, where something as significant as that happened, it's just
Yeah, that
really to me amazing.
transaction.
Sure, absolutely.
Probably in today's dollars or whatever it would be.
Oh, absolutely.
$100
the figures,
$100 million or whatever. you
much
know.
more than that, of course.
Yeah.
But the figures were there, and I honestly just don't remember them. And I didn't bring my notes with me. I should have. I suppose
Yeah.
I should have done that. But the areas we saw, like going to Würzburg, Würzburg was destroyed in World War II. And to see how it's come back and how it's been rebuilt, and the industry and what Germany has done and Austria has done as well. And then, of course, we went to Vienna. And Vienna, of course, the beautiful city that it is. And we got to, you know, stroll around, walk around, spend some time there.
And what are the prominent things that you enjoyed?
I remember the Lippenzahner, the horse barns for the Lippenzahner horses, and then the Schönberg Palace. And that was just inspiring and just wonderful, the architecture and the art collections. And it just really is absolutely fascinating. Now, the one thing I would say about this, there's a number of riverboat cruises, and they all do different itineraries. Ours was, this was a 16-day itinerary. Actually, cruising was 15 days. But you can get an 8-day cruise, you can get a 5-day cruise, you can do them on the Seine River, you can do them on the Rhine, you can do it in the area of Normandy on the canals and come back to Paris. Or you can take the full length one, which is like 25 days, and wind up in the Mediterranean or the Black Sea through the other canal systems. The advantage of the riverboat is your bed moves with you, you're going to all these places so you don't have to pack and unpack. And it was a really wonderful trip. And it was the first time I'd gotten to do a riverboat cruise like this, and it was something that I really much enjoyed, and definitely am considering again. And there's so many.
So you recommended the people of.
I do.
Yeah.
I do recommend it if you like the idea of being on a boat and a local ship, because you're eating the local food. Then of course you're off the boat on the shore and you're eating the local food in the villages.
How stable is the boat?
The boat is incredibly stable. You're in rivers.
In other words, you're not really feeling it.
You're in a
like
river.
Yeah.
You don't feel it. I mean, it's like you and I could go in a canoe in the river. It'd be the same. There's no rocking.
Yeah. It's not like the ocean.
No, and it's like I said, it's 138 passengers, 122 passengers, I can't remember on this particular one, and then 138 meter long or something. They're long, they're built to fit in the locks. So they're narrow because the locks are narrow, but they're long so they can get in and use the full advantage of the ship. But the ships only have 3 levels of decking. It's not like the huge cruise ships, they're just not like that. And there's so many lines that do it, some are bigger, some are smaller. Highly recommended it. It was a wonderful trip. It really was. Now, and it was something that, I don't think that I would do that same itinerary again because there's so many others. I mean, these cruise lines, they sail in Thailand, they sail in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam,
right.
They sail all over the world. So there's lots of other opportunities if you want to do a sail like that.
Well, that sounds very interesting.
It's a fascinating time.
What future trips are you planning?
Oh, gosh. Well, that's a great story. We haven't talked about a couple other trips I've already done, the Queen Mary trip, and
okay, we got the Queen Mary.
Right,
That'll sound
I just
like
did 2 weeks in Portugal in October,
right?
Which was an amazing trip in and of itself.
I'm going to Portugal myself.
Well,
so.
good for you. You're going to enjoy it. People, the food, everything was amazing. Just incredible place. And I got to our sister city. And I got
which one?
Gouveia.
Okay.
And I have a picture of me standing under the Cidade de Danbury street sign, because they have a street sign named the City of Danbury Street.
I got to see that picture one of these days.
Yeah, so I have myself a picture of a selfie there. Well, actually, I had somebody else take it.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, so it's Portugal is a great time. You'll truly love that. Next year, I'm looking at a couple things. I'm considering Iceland. I'm working with my travel agent, trying to figure out if I can get to Japan as well. I'm ready to start heading east a little bit, and whether or not it's Japan or the Vietnam area, Thailand. I'd like to see Thailand, I think.
Thailand, a lot of people say Thailand's really great.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. And the idea of going to Japan, I want to see Kyoto, and I want to see their temple spaces, and they're supposed to be so wonderfully incorporating into the landscape and peaceful and all. And I have this fascination for Shintoism, so I think I'd like to go there as well.
And have you gone anywhere else in the east?
Well, I've never. No,
you haven't.
As far east as I've been is Hawaii.
Because I talk to some people like travelers, but they don't want to talk on camera. But they've done some traveling there. But you've done mainly Europe, so we got that in common. That we've done. I haven't been in the rivers though. I was in one river, I got to say, and I stood up, or we were in the river, and I was saying, just think, if you fall in this river, you're insane. And then they wanted to throw me in because this is in Paris, the name of the river is the Seine.
Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, okay. All right, sure.
Don't throw me over.
Nah.
Okay.
Be careful with that.
That was interesting. Yeah. But
rivers are magical. When you say something about rivers,
they're relaxing.
Are magical because they're never the same.
Yeah.
They're always changing. And for example, this year in August, one of the trips I took Beth Ann and I took Beth Ann and we went to a road trip to St. Louis for the total eclipse of the sun.
Right.
And 15 days going across 15 or 16 states. And what a great time that was. But we got to the Mississippi, and of course we walked across the Mississippi on the Chain of Rocks Bridge just south of St. Louis, which is a very famous bridge because it used to be Route 66. and which of course is a famous road in the country. But we also had to go down and put our feet in the Mississippi River. And there are riverboat cruises on the Mississippi, by the way, and you can sail all the way up. So yeah, there's lots of things to do.
And it's something a lot of people don't think of. They think about going to one place, staying 3 days, and or whatever, whether it's a casino or whatever, and they don't think about, hey, the other things that are possible, especially with the river.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Certainly.
How long was your trip on the Queen Mary?
Oh, the Queen Mary, it was a 9-day, 8-night passage. And it was something I've always wanted to do. Once again, the history part of it, because it was leaving, from Southampton, the very famous port where the Titanic left from,
and others,
most of the sailing ships that ships that did. And of course, for me, it was a historical perspective again. I have relatives on the Mayflower, and my other relatives came over in 1628. So and they sailed from that area, and to sail from England to the United States, to me, was something I'd always wanted to do. It was on my top 10 list, and when I retired, it was number 2 on my top 10 list, so we got to do that last year. And what a great time that was, and that one just Beth Ann and I went, and it was wonderful. Yeah, it was a great time. The cruise ship itself is beautiful. The Queen Mary, Queen Mary II, this is, of course, is a gorgeous ship, beautifully appointed, and of course they have all that pomp and the circumstance that the British are known for on the Cunard lines. And
they have their high tea.
Well, they have that, and then they have the the nights where you get dressed up and you're in a tuxedo 3 or 4 nights on the cruise. And then they had these wonderful events. They had a black and white night, a ball, and then they had the Roaring Twenties, and we were dressed up. I had a pinstripe suit on, and my fedora, and and Beth Ann had the flapper dress and such. It was great. What a wonderful time! It was just amazing. So I highly recommend. And then they had lectures, by the way. There were 4 or 5 different lecturers on the ship, and they each gave 4 or 5 different lectures. And the lectures covered everything from
everything having to do with the ship and
not just the ship, but they covered World War I. There was a lecturer on the Battle of the Somme, who actually he's the technical director for a new movie, Dunkirk, that just came out. He's an author. They had the gentleman who was the former head of the British Space Agency, and he talked for 5 different lectures on the history of space exploration and gave us a really wonderful view of what the exploration to Mars is going to be like. Then we had another gentleman who was a former U.S. ambassador to 2 or 3 different countries in the Mideast. He talked about the history of the Mideast. He talked about the history of Israeli and Arab relations, and then there was a gentleman, and the ship's theme was a cruise for jazz. And
they're telling me we don't have much
Oh,
time.
I'm sorry.
We got 30 seconds. No,
I'm sorry.
we were going along. If anybody has any questions, is there an email they can ask you questions?
Oh, absolutely, certainly.
Yeah, maybe mention your email.
Yeah,
at this point in
very
time.
simple. jeffherald@gmail.com, and that's GEOFFHERALD @gmail.com.
I want to thank you for coming on the show,
Oh, John,
and I
thank
want
you.
to thank the viewers for tuning in to 30 Minutes, and we'll see you next week, same time, same station.
Thank you so much.